had to order the correct inner seal because somehow I ended up ordering one for a 86 to 90 Hilux axle. I don't know how that happened, but we got the right ones on order. So in the meantime, we're gonna put these bearings in here. Should be good to go bearing wise here. Looks like there's a gap, but I think that's just how the bearing tapers. So in the sake of resealing this side until we get our new axle seals in, which for you will be a couple minutes, for me probably gonna be a couple days. So these are our new brackets that we got. I'll set those off to the side. Here are our new felts. Here are our new split rings right here, and our new rubber gaskets right there. So I'm gonna put these on right now, because if I don't, I'm gonna forget, and then I'm gonna be like, oh man, I forgot. So the felts are gonna go first, followed by, or the felt, I'm not gonna put both of them on, I'm just gonna put one on. So I believe it goes felt, which is a little bit of a tight fit. So we got felt right here. Then we've got the rubber piece. And then we've got this new split ring, which you're gonna have to play with a little bit. Bend it back into position right there. And so I'm just gonna leave this hang here like this, just so I don't forget to do this, because if you forget to do this, you have to take everything back apart. Now what we have to do is we have to pack these bearings. I'm gonna pack them by hand. I have a bearing packer, but I'm gonna use it for the red grease for the wheel bearings. These are small enough to where they're not gonna take very much, but this is what I'm using. This is a Moly fortified gray grease that I'm gonna use for these bearings, as well as the CV axle, and pretty much all for in here when we repack all this stuff. So this is, no matter how you do this, this is a gross job. So unless you have a bearing packer, basically we're going to get a bunch of grease, the palm of our hand right here, and we're going to take the open end of the bearing and we're going to push this grease through using the palm of our hand. And you're gonna keep doing it until that grease is coming out of the rollers at the top. So you see how it like peeked through on the top there? That's what you want, and you want it all the way around. So it'll take some effort, and it'll take a little while. But you wanna make sure these are thoroughly packed, full of grease, because you don't want these failing on you. And when someone says packing bearings, this is what they mean. It means you gotta shove this grease, essentially, into the rollers all the way around. And we're gonna have to do this with all the bearings we have. Once you have a good amount of grease on here, and these bearings are packed, I'm just going to drop this one in place right here, just like that, and then I'm just going to go ahead and pack the other one and then set it aside, because it goes on the bottom, which I should have got that bearing out before I got my fingers filled with grease. Same process for this guy. Get that grease in the palm of your hand. Definitely recommend doing this with gloves. You don't have to, I mean, whatever floats your boat, but I prefer doing it with gloves. Otherwise, it gets pretty messy and gross. Just gonna tap this bearing on here with my hammer. And essentially, this is gonna go back underneath, but we need to put this guy in first. So we need to get this hub assembly and get this guy on here. Remember, we put the back seals on and the wipers and everything else. So now, remember this cap on the top here, which is in here, has some shims to it, which are right here. So I don't know what the thickness of the original shim was. I have the original shim right here. It looks like there's only one shim, so I'm going to try putting one shim back on there and see if that gets us to where we need to be. Essentially, that's just going to go back in here. I'm going to locate it on the bearing, and then it's going to take some taps to get in here. I'm not going to wail on this thing, guys, because it needs to go in through the center of the bearing, which it looks like it is. So I think if we just hit it, we just bounce it back and forth a little bit, we'll be able to get it around there. We're gonna get our bolts for this. So again, there's really no way to check this preload until everything is kind of snug in its place. Okay. We want to be careful not to damage our seals that we have hanging back here. So just make sure those are out of the way before you like max this guy out on one side. I'll get us on there a little bit. You see, we still need for this to come all the way up to properly set this preload. But remember, we got all those cone washers and washers that I still need to clean up. I'm gonna get some Loctite as well because I do not trust these things. So we got the cone washers, followed by the normal washer, followed by a nut. And I'm just gonna secure that there right now because basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these bolts to suck this steering arm up into the hub where it needs to be. And then I'm going to take the nuts back off and secure them with some removable high-strength Loctite. So I've never seen this stuff before. Some of you guys probably have. But essentially, it's got the strength of red Loctite. It's an orange Loctite. And it's got the strength of red Loctite, but it's temporary. So it's not permanent on here, which is nice because it's got the strength, but I can still remove it, and it's not going to give me any issues, hopefully. Essentially, what I'm going to do is I'm going to very slowly use my ratcheting wrench here to get this steering arm back into position. So I've got this orange thread locker, it says high strength removable, and I want to use it on these bottom bolts because they have a tendency to come loose. And I'm going to do that for these bottom 4 bolts. So I'm going to take them off one by one. So I'm going to take some of this and I'm going to put some on the stud itself. Just a little bit right there. Don't need to go crazy. And I'm going to put some on the nut as well, on the inside. A little dab will do ya. So I'm gonna get them all Loctited up. and then I'll go back around and I'll torque them all at the same time. Now I'm going to go around. I'm going to torque all these to 71 foot-pounds. I don't know what that is in newton meters. I think it's like 90 something. Don't quote me on that. That's 1. That's 2. 3. 4. And we got some good preload here. Not super loose. As a matter of fact, what we can do, and I don't know the actual preload spec on this, but I've got a nice little Bass Pro Shops fish scale here. And what you can do, I don't know if the camera is going to be able to see this, but you can push this knuckle all the way in. Look at the gauge in there. And what you can do is pull on this and see how much resistance there is. And to me, it looks like there's around 7 pounds of resistance, which I believe is correct, which is where you want the preload for this. I don't remember the spec off the top of my head, but you want roughly, I think it's like 7 to 8 pounds, or 6 to 8 pounds of preload when you start turning this. So this is a lot smoother than it was before I took it off, so that's a good sign. So thanks Bass Pro Shops for the fish scale, which also doubles as a preload scale. Now what we're gonna have to do, I'll turn so the camera can see me, is essentially we're gonna have to line up our seals back here. So our little metal seals got to fit in this inlay back here. I don't know if the camera can see that or not. And then a reminder that these are going to go like this and kind of overlap each other. So we need to line the felt up with these. So we're going to do one at a time. It's a little bit easier to keep track of. And this rubber piece and felt is essentially just going to go up here. And I think we're going to need to do this like this right here. So I'll put these bolts down and grab one. I'm going to push it through the metal and the felt. Make sure our little rubber gasket is in place, and just kind of feel around for this bolt hole right here. I'm just going to go one by one like this. Oh, that's the old one. Let me get this guy on here. Another bolt. I'm going to get the bottom half on, because these metal pieces kind of have to overlap a little bit on each side. Oh, that's why there wasn't a third bolt on there. It was snapped off in there. So I'm not going to extract that bolt right now. Maybe in the future. That will be another video. So there's a broken off bolt right here, unfortunately, and I'm gonna have to extract that later down the line, which that would be a cool video for y'all to see. It shouldn't be too difficult. I can just bring out a welder and weld a tiny nut to it, but that very much so explains why there were only 5 bolts on there. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to just use a regular ratchet to get these in place so I don't do the same thing and cause more work for myself later. So now it's time to work on the hub. We're going to pull all this old stuff out. Here's an old bearing. Here's a little, I think that's just to hold the grease in place. And now we need to flip this over and hit the back side. I'm just gonna clean as I go. So now what we need to do is flip this guy over without raising my toolbox up. Okay. And you get this back seal out. So I have another one to replace those. There we go. Almost hit my camera woman. We got that seal out, so she's out. We can get this bearing out. Doesn't look too terrible. Well, yeah, it's a little gross sounding. Start getting rid of this grease. Now, got to hammer these races out. Again, just like the other races we did on the berth bearings, we want to be careful not to score the sides, and there's 4 relief cuts, so you're able to get a little punch in here and tap out each side evenly. It takes a little bit of force. There we go. Came out the bottom side. Now we're gonna flip it and do the same thing. Obviously, if you have like a block of wood or something to put this hub on to avoid like damaging the studs, I advise you do that. I don't have it, so I'm just gonna use cardboard and hope for the best. And there's the back race. Boom. Toss these. I have other ones. This a little bit. All right, so now we're gonna go back in here again, get some more grease out. This has got some wear to it, that's for sure. So I believe at one point in time this preload was probably way too tight, which probably caused it to loosen up. So hopefully I have another one in the kit. Let's go find out. Looks like we don't have another one of those, unfortunately. We're gonna have to reuse that. I might flip it so that this side is facing out, so the bearing has a new nice clean surface to ride on, but oh well. In the meantime, we're gonna set this bearing race down in here. I'm gonna grease probably the back side of this actually. New bearing packer. I've never owned a bearing packer before, so that's gonna be cool to have. So I'm just gonna do my due diligence and clean these new races real quick. Of course, inside surface needs to be pretty clean. So the smaller bearing and race go in the front, the bigger one go in the back. The tapered end, so you can see how this is tapered, it's gonna go towards the bottom if you're setting it from the top. Basically this flat part of the bearing race right here is gonna go inside like this. It's gonna go in there, in case you were wondering. So, I'm gonna slip this in here. Now some people say not to lube the races. I've always lubed them. Haven't had any issues. What do you guys think? So I have another set of bearing races up here that I think are smaller. These are from the Forerunner. So I think it's gonna be enough to get it started, but I'm not trying to get this bearing race stuck in there. now that I'm banging on this thing, we're getting some bounce back in this. And the sound has changed a little bit, so that typically means your race is seated correctly and all the way to the bottom, which it feels like it is. So I'm just gonna make sure I'm around here. Yeah, so we're seated on that side. So now I'm gonna flip it. I'm gonna do the same for the back race. This bearing can go all the way in once it's packed because the seal helps keep it in. But the front one, I'm just gonna leave packed in the bearing packer until I get the front seals done. Or I'll just not pack it until it's time to go. That's probably the better idea. Bounce back in my chisel, so I know we are seated here. All right, so now we're gonna pack this back bearing. I'm gonna use my fancy new bearing packer. Essentially, we have the wider opening on the back side of this bearing, right? And we're just gonna put it in here, and we're gonna use this to center it. And ideally, the grease is gonna come through this hole and basically force itself through the center of the bearing. Let's hope that's true. I need to fill this up with some grease. Oh yeah, look at that. She thick. It is working. Look at that, guys. You gotta press pretty hard, but it's actually getting in there. That's it. That's the coolest thing I've ever seen. Right there. Look at that. Getting all up in them rollers and everything. Dude, my whole life has been a lie. All this time packing bearings by hand like a pleb for what? Oh. Get this guy out of here. Look at that, guys. It thoroughly packed this. Can't get over that.
Pretty cool.
It's better than doing it by hand, huh? Should suffice. Now, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take some good old Permatex #2 Forma gasket sealant, slow drying, non-hardening. And what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna apply it to the outside edge of this seal and then drive this seal in, which I think I can use this. Yeah, I'm gonna use that as a seal. Basically what this is this doesn't harden in the presence of oxygen or something like that. It's an anaerobic sealant. That's it. Make sure it's flush.
Two hours later.
It's been a couple seconds for you, it's been a week for me, but we've got the correct oil seals this time for the inner seals, so we're gonna continue this, hammer these in and then put the hubs back together because I want to get this thing mobile after a week, so let's do it. I'm just gonna take some oil from the diff here, from the axle, and just kind of coat this outer seal. So you'll notice I've already put these the actual hubs on. So I'm hoping I can sneak in here with these hubs on and the bearings in place and get this oil seal in here, which I'm pretty confident I can. So I'm just gonna kind of press it in there by hand, just a little bit, just to hold it in place. And I'm gonna take this 36 mil socket and a little extension, and just gently tap her on through. Now, the Marlin crawler seals only go so far into the axle housing, so they only go until they're basically flush mounted, right? So they're only going to go so far. Granted, this is way easier with the hub off. However, I kind of wanted to get this as close to done as I possibly could. There we go. Just needed a little more energy. Then I'm gonna use the end of this hammer because it's a little bit softer than metal, so hopefully I don't damage the seal or anything like that. I'm not really hitting this super hard. If you have the actual seal driver, please use the seal driver. It'll be fine. So I'm just gonna make sure this seal in here is lubricated and ready to accept the axle. I've already got my axle prepped. It's already greased. The CV's greased. Essentially what we're gonna do, plop it in here, and then we're gonna fill up this knuckle basically with 2/3 full of grease. So the black grease we're using for the axle itself. I'm gonna make sure this axle is relatively clean. It doesn't have to be spotless because you just want to make sure there's no dust in it. And since this has been sitting in my garage for a week, I want to make sure there's nothing crazy on it. So we've already got this axle packed with the CV joint in here. You saw us grease that up as I whack my vehicle. But essentially what we're going to do is make sure these flat spots are facing the top and bottom, because that's the only way this axle fits in. And we just want to make sure that we're not damaging the seal as it goes in. So again, these flat spots are going to go, and you might have to mess with it a bit, lean it and twist it to get it situated into the differential. Typically you'll have to press down on it a little bit to get it seated in here. You gotta remember, this is a relatively long axle, so you're trying to reach the differential, which is clear on the other side of the vehicle. Oh, there we go. All right. Excellent. One way to tell if you have it in or not is I'm gonna throw in the other axle shaft and make sure that it spins when I spin this one. Same principle applies for the shorty axle. Again, don't damage any seals or anything nuts. And just locate her in here. Oh, look at that. Went right in. That means we're in the differential. That's good news. In order to pack this sucker full of grease up to 2/3 of the way, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take off this little square bolt, which I might need some more leverage in this, but essentially this is what you're supposed to use to actually grease this stuff, because it just inserts into the, the hub itself. Really easy. So if you didn't know this, this is what you're supposed to use to actually grease the hub whenever you're low. I mean, in a perfect world, it's not gonna leak, but the world is not perfect. So I'm going to load my grease gun and try to fill this 2/3 of the way up. Just stick it in here and just start pumping. It's gonna take a while. This is why I wish I had an automatic grease gun. Let's wipe a majority of it off, and then I'll go back with the brake cleaner. I did replace these already. Actually, I replaced it in one, and it was kind of a pain in the butt to get out, and I didn't really have the right tool to get it out. I was able to get it out by basically mangling it, getting a chisel up underneath the lip, and it would fold this lip up, and then I just basically smashed it, and eventually it came out. but it was very sketchy, and this one doesn't look bad, so I'm actually not going to replace it, just because I don't have the right tooling to do this. I have another one. If this gives me an issue, it's not a big deal to pull the spindle off and replace it. It was really sketchy trying to replace it without the correct tool and without being able to press it out. So the other one was replaced. That was kind of like my experiment, but it was, like I said, it was very sketch, so I'm not going to do that again. I don't have any pins to help me do this, so essentially what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stick all this stuff on and then shove my extension through it and hope for the best. But first, I'm going to take some of this slow drying, non-hardening Permatex number 2, and it's just an anaerobic sealant, and I don't know the purpose behind it, to be honest. I've heard some people say it's to keep water out. Sometimes I heard it's to say it's, required. I don't know. But essentially I'm just going to smear a lot of this all over this gasket. That'll also help it kind of stay in place too. This U-shape is going to go towards the bottom. And I'm just going to try to line this up with these holes. And you can see the gaskets, the sealer that I'm using kind of holds it in place. And that allows me to grab this spindle, which will also hold it. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to coat this second one as well. Same deal with the spindle here, is you want it facing down. This little notch facing down basically, and this guy is going to go on here as well. This gasket, I'm going to try to line up the holes best I can so this will stick here. I've got all 8 bolts. I need this guy, and then I believe this is going to go like this as well, so it's going to go together like this essentially. And all the holes line up, so I must be doing something right, guys. So I'm just gonna try to finagle this on here. There I go, using that word again. Essentially the spindle is just gonna slide on here. Oh, hopefully not slide too much. I'm gonna try to fish this bolt through at least one of these. So this is where it could get useful to actually just buy a couple studs. I think it's like M12 by 125, these bolts. But essentially, I'm just trying to get everything situated. It's a lot easier if you have a couple of studs to push through the hub or push through this whole assembly. I've seen a lot of guys on YouTube do it that way, and I would agree with them. But, if you don't want to spend $1 on a set of studs, then be my guest and do it the hard way like me, because it can be done. All right, so I've got 2 bolts situated. Now I can start to feed the rest in here. I'm going to give this just a little tap, because that spindle, I can see the spindle's not perfectly seated, and the bolts will probably drive it on home. But let me look up the torque spec for these, and then if there is one, I'll torque that to what it's supposed to be. Word on the street is it's 34 foot-pounds. I'm just going to take a ratchet and kind of snug these up by hand. So that's what we got for the spindle. So I know some of you are watching me install this, and you're like, hey dummy, you forgot the dust shield. And you'd be correct. So now I gotta take that back off. This is the wrong side. This is the other side. I'm just a mess today, guys. I just gotta grease this spindle and throw everything back together. Basically, I'm just gonna rotate this so it's facing the top, and then I'm just gonna hold everything together and slide this spindle in. Locate these bearings. All right, there we go. Now I'm gonna go over doing some preload. First, I'm gonna clean these axle nuts up. So this initial one is gonna go on. Just hand tight all the way. What we're gonna do is we're gonna torque this down to 43 Newton meters initially. And then we're gonna do 4 Newton meters after we back it out. I'll kind of explain why after I get to that part. So I'm gonna take this, this Toyota axle nut socket, which I bought. It works on all Toyotas with this kind of hub system. I don't think it works for the newer ones. This is more for like the older ones. But essentially, what we're going to do is we're going to torque this to 43 foot-pounds. Okay, it's 43 foot-pounds. And we're just going to make sure we're going to spin this a couple times to kind of locate those bearings. So I like doing it like 4 or 5 full turns one side, and then I'll go back the other way the same amount. And then we just want to check to make sure there's no in and out play. And I think we're good. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take that same socket and we're going to back this off until it is finger tight. We're going to take all that tension off of it. And then I don't think my torque wrench goes down this low, but it should be 4 foot-pounds. We're going to see how low we go. Oh, it goes to 5 foot-pounds, and that's close enough for me. So I'm just going to very slowly, literally that's it, barely resting on its own weight. So ideally, what we should have now, if I use I'm gonna get my Bass Pro Shops. So we still have no play. That's good. Bearing preload feels pretty good, but I'm gonna verify. So I got my Bass Pro Shops spring tension gauge, Ghetto spring tension gauge. And essentially all I'm looking for when I pull this is I want to be between 6 and 12 and a half. So you can see there, that pull got us around 10, which is pretty much perfect. Well, it's actually, more accurately, it's about 9. So that means I'm within spec. So that's good. This is probably not super accurate, but this is gonna get you close enough. Just buy a real spring tension gauge. They're only like 20 bucks. I just didn't order one because I'm a dummy. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our lock washer and we're gonna locate this to the top, like so. And then we're gonna take our second nut. This is just our keeper nut, basically. Work spec for this guy is 47 foot-pounds for the outer nut. So we're gonna tighten this outer nut to 47 foot-pounds. Boom. Okay, yeah, there we go. So we started moving, we're like right at 10 right now when I pull it. So what you wanna look for is where this star ring kind of overlaps. So I can see on the back nut that this tab overlaps the nut, the nut on the back. Pretty much sits directly center with one. So I'll put my chisel in here. I'm gonna hammer that on home. same concept for this one, and it looks like the best one is probably this guy right here. I'm just gonna stick this chisel in here and just bend it forward. Now we've got this little hub seal. I'm gonna put some anaerobic sealant on here. I've already got this cleaned up on this opposite side, and I'm just gonna seal this guy too. I'm just gonna slide this guy on here, this gasket, line it up with all the studs. I'm gonna slide this guy on here. So this, you might have to play with this a little bit. So you see how that axle doesn't really line up, so I have to like spline it and then turn it. Then place it here. I'm just gonna give it a couple taps on the way home. If this happens to you and your axle is too far in, you can just thread a bolt in here and you'll be able to pull it out so you can get this snap ring on. Just an FYI, in case you guys run into that too. It happens. That basically keeps the axle in its place. You get these cone washers in here. Then, the last thing we need to do, well, second to last thing, is throw this snap ring back on here. Get this around here. And again, these are the wrong snap ring pliers, but they work. So now, the last thing we got to do, install this dust cap. I've seen some people throw some of this sealer on here as well, I guess to keep the water out. So I'm going to do the same. I'm going to place it right here. A couple hits with the hammer. That's it. Only thing we got to do, put the brake caliper and ABS sensor back on. There we go. So, little insider information for my viewers. I attempted to replace those rear ball joints, but they're seized in that shaft. So I'm gonna need to get some heat or just replace the shaft, which I'm thinking about replacing them with the Heim joints from Slee Off-Road, basically. That way I don't really have to worry about that again. But for now, these are gonna have to do. That's pretty much the end, guys. So this is, you know, the process on how to replace your wheel bearings, repack your flange or your axle housings, your hubs. So the next side, we're just gonna run straight through, time lapse it or speed it up. That way you guys can see it on the other side as well. But essentially that's pretty much where we're gonna end this repair.